Hi, this is Paul. This is the second conversation. Even the title "Marriage Crisis," I'm not really quite sure if that's what I want. That's what we're talking about. So we had a little pre-talk before I hit record to talk to Rod and Eamon and Catherine. And those of you who are catching this for the first time, I don't know what I'll entitle it yet. I usually don't title things until after, because then I know what's actually in it. But we're talking, and Rod had just said, I don't think we've even sort of, figured out exactly what we're talking about. And I'm totally fine with that. So in between the last one, which we did 2 weeks ago, and this one, we had the Thanksgiving holiday, and Rod had written something. And I think that's probably where we'll start. And then Eamon had replied. So that's where we'll begin. I don't think we'll have any trouble filling 2 hours, frankly. So let's go.
So the fact that we're talking again, does that mean we didn't solve it in the first pass?
I don't think this is something that can be solved by talking. As much as I respect people who try to do marriage counseling, it's not what I've seen.
Yeah, and I realized I sort of pointed out some things about my participation in the conversation last time that sort of where I sort of a bit unique. But one of the things that it's obvious, but we've alluded to it, but we haven't made it overt, which is I'm the only one on this call who's been divorced. Which I also think you almost can't talk about marriage without talking about divorce.
Yeah.
I left my first marriage after 10 years. So after we had our first conversation, of course, that gets you thinking. And I can riff with the best of them, but maybe I'll actually try to read what I wrote as a result of it. Because Eamon said something in the first conversation. I actually went back and found it and listened to that part again. That just kind of grabbed me, and he was really just kind of saying it in passing too. But I thought it just had some hooks in it that I thought were really interesting. So I'm going to read this, or try to read it anyway. See if at least that way I'll get it right. So what I wrote was something clicked for me during our first conversation when Eamon briefly described a capitalist approach to marriage as something like, I make myself a good product that you buy, you make yourself a good product that I buy. We can have an exchange here where we both get what we want. And the title of this little rant is "Love is Unconditional, Relationships Are Not." That was my subject heading. Maybe it would be better to say love, might be unconditional, but relationships are definitely not. Anyway, so I've been circling this subject for a while and alluded to it in some of my comments, but I'm starting to get more clarity and really do think it's foundational to the subject of marriage and its relevance or lack thereof for a modern world. And if my instincts are correct, marriage is in very, very big trouble. An expression I heard years ago and I never forgot was, love is unconditional, relationships are not. Now, frankly, it's not exactly true that love is unconditional, although maybe some people wish it were. But the distinction between love and relationships was a crucial step in my thinking. You can love someone and definitely not want to be married to them. In other words, relationships are conditional. If no-fault divorce has any salutary effect, it may be to keep us all a little bit more honest in how we relate to our spouses. Once you've introduced the idea that people might have conditions, and not just for romantic partners, but any kind of relationship, the entire liberal project begins to teeter. Of course, there have always been conditions placed on any member of society, but when those were relatively universal and culturally enforced, your mileage wouldn't vary too much. If a woman went looking for a husband, both she and he, and pretty much everyone else, knew approximately what husband meant, and vice versa. In other words, these words described roles, and those roles were crucial to a stable society. How many people do you know today who are raising their children to become good wives or good husbands? And this issue extends far beyond dating and marriage. One of the founding principles of most Western democracies is the freedom of association. Yet as soon as you give people the freedom to associate, you also give them the freedom to not associate. As soon as people have the declared right to decide who they hang out with, guess what? Inequality skyrockets, inherent biases go from being covert to overt, and inevitably the discourse shifts from equality to equity. Legislative efforts have emerged over time to address cases where not associating equates to prohibited discrimination, but this is always a blunt instrument and woefully inadequate to address the much deeper issue. The fact remains that you can't make someone care about you. In love, dating, marriage, friendships, even work. In other words, in life, you're really going to need people to care about you. And those people are going to have conditions. And those conditions often turn out to be quite uncomfortable. I want my wife to love me and accept me as I am. Who doesn't, right? How about if I gain 100 pounds or gamble away our savings or take up a drug habit? It turns out she has all kinds of conditions that were taking shape long before she met me. One time she shared with me a list she had been encouraged to create by a friend. The idea was to manifest the man she was looking for by writing down a list of his traits. Good news, seems to have worked because it was a pretty extensive list. And I checked every box except for a love of baseball. She now wonders why she wrote that one. I mean, I enjoy a game here and there, but it really does drag on, doesn't it? Anyway, she put a lot of thought into compiling a very long list of things she was looking for in a man. You might call those conditions. What she hadn't done pretty much at all was think about what that man might want from her, or what kind of relationship she was hoping to create with him. When the first online dating sites emerged, conditions became much more overt. There it was, right at the start. You create a profile, you give your basic stats, height, body type, income range, etc. Then you describe what you're looking for. The first person who filled out one of those forms on Match.com, if they were paying attention, could have predicted what would happen next. The manosphere calls it the sexual marketplace. Anyone hoping that they'd be loved just for who they are was in for a rude awakening. In the last 20 years or so, we all learned, as if we didn't know, that what men look for in a woman is starkly different than what women look for in a man. And for some people in particular, this fell somewhere between infuriating and deeply painful. Some men tend to be attracted to looks. The younger, within reason, and prettier, the better. Women tend to be attracted to height, status, wealth, power. Both sides of this are deeply vexing and often out of reach. You can't get younger, for example, or taller. And even if you think you'd be perfectly happy with your average partner in an average life, there's social media reminding you just how beautiful a woman can be and just how big a house that kind of money can buy. Once we acknowledge that people have conditions, we inevitably begin to argue about which conditions are fair and which are not, which inevitably points to some kind of universal system of values that the liberal project is allergic to. If you ever find yourself at a multi-generational event, let's say a wedding, and you end up seated at a table with an elderly couple that's been married for 60 years, ask them their secret. Chances are the answers will seem banal to you. He'll say something like he saw her across the room at the Saturday night dance. He liked her pretty blue eyes and the way she smiled, or she'll say something like compromise or communication. It's very likely that you'll go away from that conversation no wiser about how to end up like them when you're in your 80s. How many of the greatest generation went off to fight in World War II with a locket in their pocket of the pretty girl back home? How many lifelong marriages were formed out of something as flimsy as he liked the way she laughed at his jokes? Today, we all want more than just someone who will laugh at our jokes. This raises more questions than it answers, but perhaps we return to Eamon's comment. Except the product I'm offering might instead be the qualities of my character, my values, my virtue, how I relate to my fellow human beings, not the least of which being my spouse and immediate family. So perhaps the redemptive thread we can offer is if you want to find a good wife, make yourself a good husband. and vice versa. And a very generative conversation could be, in light of the drastic realignment of gender roles and norms, with two-income families becoming the broad norm, and allowing that male and female attraction, while somewhat malleable, won't change much. What today makes for a good spouse, and how would a motivated person go about becoming one? And I should, as a disclaimer, there is heteronormativity riddled throughout this piece. I should probably add that disclaimer. But that was what I wrote.
All right. Well, Eamon, I think you have the privilege here because you wrote a response, and then we'll I don't know if you want to read it or if you have it in front of you, or you just want to vocalize it a little bit.
Well, I could probably read it just fine. Might be a little smoother. All right, so let's get into the body of it. So I wrote, listening to some of your recent talks, Paul, and reviewing your email, Rod, has brought to mind how slippery terms are. Burke, who's my son, is taking Latin, and the other night we were talking about the basics of hermeneutics and various fallacies, namely the word concept fallacy. A word can be present in the absence of a concept, and this is certainly true of words like marriage and love. A mentor of mine once said something like, Islam is to the Middle East as psychology is to the West. You can't escape it, as is embedded in the law, or it constitutes social reality at a fundamental level. It's embedded in the law, education, business strategy, etc. The concept of love being unconditional is a prime example, an evidence of our having marinated in psychology, particularly the Rogerian flavor, when discussing love and relationships. Many people functionally want to be married to a psychotherapist as it pertains to their desires and values, rather than a husband or wife. Obviously, with regard to the relationship itself, it may mirror a desire for a parent, friend, or sexual experience, but the baseline is a desire for complete acceptance. And like a wrench doesn't work if you use it as a hammer, a marriage doesn't work if you expect your spouse to function with the unconditional positive regard of a Rogerian therapist. Rod's thoughts on unconditional love have my mind going too. There's so much baggage with the term unconditional love. I recall an article about God's love being better than unconditional a few years ago, and think it's getting at a similar idea. People mean well when they use the term unconditional. They're right that conditional love is manipulative and therefore not love. The idea of love being contra-conditional, by contrast, has always resonated with me. That my wife loves me despite how I am is different than her throwing out any standards so I can receive blanket acceptance and approval no matter what I do. Love is transformative, and unconditional love lacks the power to change. It's benign and flabby. Is it any wonder the prevalent strategy for finding and attracting a mate often has the effect of making both parties worse? Somewhere we conflated unconditional positive regard for love, and its effects are devastating. Perhaps it's the downstream effect of the majority of those creating our entertainment being in therapy themselves. Regardless, it's another reason why, though I'm interested in evolutionary psychology, I'm doubtful there is much to be found that will solve the marriage crisis. It's all earth and no heaven, meaning the concepts and terms will be bestial and instinctive driven. I suspect that the growing interest in evolutionary psychology and popular culture is a symptom of the marriage crisis rather than a solution. Interestingly, my last real conversation with my grandfather involved him explaining why his wife had married someone else before him. Women can't help going for big, strong, masculine men, he told me, because it's in their genes and therefore they can't be held accountable for their actions. I'm not sure why he decided to bring it up. Perhaps he was preparing me for being cheated on, but it left me a little more self-conscious about being 5'10" and 170 pounds at the time. Looking forward to tonight.
Wow. Catherine, any off the bat things from either of those?
I think Eamon's grandpa's funny. I mean, I like that this is where we're pushing into it for our next conversation, because it makes sense that we would start with sort of defining the field a little bit and say, what are we talking about when we say marriage? What do we actually mean by that? I agree that I think culturally we've conflated love with like a Rogerian just acceptance, and without a broader vision of love as well. Here, I'll throw out a definition we can play with. Looking to help the other person flourish, cherishing the other person, honoring the other person, and caring for them. And I think in the context of marriage, some level of adoration is appropriate as well. And I think a lot of that got tossed for the more transactional, but with that like it's this weird mix of like transactional but also positive regard, where it's like, I won't judge you if you don't judge me. You can do whatever crap you want and I'll do whatever crap I want, and we'll both make each other feel okay about whatever weird fetish you have or your gambling addiction or whatever. We'll just be here for each other and not judge each other. And
it's the customer's always right.
Yeah. Yeah, the customer's always right. And so I think that our cultural definition of marriage has to be reshaped if we're going to make any headway, because right now nobody wants to buy the product that marriage is. Well, maybe some people do, but then they don't stick around with it for very long, right? So.
Could I insert something here, Paul, just because it sort of might help inform like my motivation, like where I'm coming from and why I sort of focused on this, is that, you know, God rest their souls. My parents are gone now, but they did not have a very good marriage. And I remember growing up in the 70s when a lot of parents were getting divorced and kind of half hoping that maybe mine would too. Now, with the benefit of time and age and hopefully some wisdom, I can see why it was better that, you know, my dad stuck it out and didn't leave like a lot of dads did. But I emerged into adulthood with some ideas about, man, it would have been nice if someone had come in and, you know, played referee here, introduced some accountability. When marriage is for life, no matter what, well, that just leads to all sorts of abuse and all sorts of bad outcomes, or at least less than optimal outcomes. Most human beings are not at their best when they know there's no consequences to their actions, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was my little insert there about no fault divorce, despite I'm sure all of us could go on and on about all the ways it's, you know, created wreckage in society. It does have this one, you know, beneficial effect, which is it, you know, it kind of keeps you honest, right? So that was part of the reason why I brought it to the table, is that, you know, my perspective is, you know, influenced by that, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and all these historical connections, you know, I had Carl Truman for my church history prof when I was at Westminster, and one of his sayings was that the church never recovered from the invention of the automobile. And what he meant by that was there's no church accountability. Like if you wanted to, you could just go to the next church. There's no, being excommunicated means nothing, right? You're able to just sort of go wherever you please. And so that lack of accountability, I think, combined with churches that at that time, you know, I don't know if it's for fear of losing people and, you know, being afraid of using church discipline, or being naive, or holding views about marriage and abuse that were just, you know, were ugly, and it was just staying at what, no matter what, that those factors, I think you can't remove them from the equation. And I think it's like, yeah, you're touching on that. There wasn't accountability, and that if people wanted them, it sort of speaks to the larger vacuum in our culture generally, with a lack of a lack of authority and accountability. You're sort of free to do whatever. And that's reacting to people being stuck in very abusive situations. I run into that regularly with couples and with churches on both ends of it, and couples who are looking for a referee and there's no referee to be found.
Well, I want to push back on this no accountability. Do you really think there isn't accountability in marriage? In fact, when Paul says love keeps no record of wrongs, my impression is when I talk to married people that they keep long records of wrongs, and they are ready to bring out those records and express them in detail when the time comes. Now, there certainly are situations where people are in some ways imprisoned. And when we think about a seriously abusive relationship, let's say where the woman is has a very legitimate fear of violence or even death if she attempts to leave the relationship. And there has been historically governmental and societal institutions that reinforced that or enforced that. But for the most part, what I see with couples is that there's a lot of, for all the talk about unconditional love, there's a tremendous amount of negotiating going on in relationships, in the average relationship. And those terms are being renegotiated all the time. I did the dishes yesterday. I shouldn't have to do the dishes all the time. I mean, marriage, when you're living together, it's full of negotiation and full of accountability. And so on, it was The Crown. Recently, the newest season of The Crown focused a little bit on Charles and Diana's divorce. And that one episode had a number of little vignettes of couples talking. And basically, because at that point in England, you had to justify, the state had to approve of your grounds for divorce. And, there, at least at that point, they weren't really leaning hard into people. But I don't know if accountability is, in the way that we're talking about it, really sort of gets at, last time we also talked a little bit about marriage as a crucible. And, one of the points that Peterson has made often, which has really stuck with me, is that a challenge which is pursued volitionally is a world apart from a trial that is imposed upon us. Mm-hmm. And so it seems to me that part of the positive crucible quality of marriage has to be the voluntary pursuit of something, which gets into, I think, the next point, which is, where Rod, where you started this whole thing, in terms of there has to be, you talked about common assumptions beneath the roles. And, when we grow up in a household with a father and a mother, and probably children who grow up without a father or a mother will fill in the blanks from the other marriages and homes that they see. We map up those expectations and we've got them all there. And even though it's almost trite to say that every marriage is different, and, to sort of riff on Tolstoy a little bit, there's a billion ways to have an unhappy marriage, and how many ways to have a happy one. That's the second element of it, that so much of this has to do with what the far larger society sets as expectations and roles and patterns, because all of us bring those things into the marriage. And then it's upon that playing field that the whole game of accountability gets waged.
Remember when Peterson tripped over the enforced monogamy phrase? I think it was the New York Times, right? What was he thinking? And if you recall, after he got some pushback, he kind of brushed it away with, well, I mean, are you in favor of infidelity? And so he kind of got himself out of it by just pointing out that, well, actually, yeah, when we make commitments, we kind of expect people to keep them. But there was actually a deeper point that he was making, which is probably the reason why it created the immune response that it did, which is that for a lot of its history, marriage was essentially mandatory. You were expected to get married, right? Made me think of, I don't know this, but I heard it from somewhere, maybe on Jacob's channel or something, that a rabbi was expected to be married, right? Like, with all of these assumptions that we're pointing at baked into that, right? Because of, yes, it contributes to stable society, but it also contributes to the stuff we talked about last time. Like it'll make you grow up. It's the crucible that you're referring to. It's steel sharpening steel. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people are better off in at least a good marriage. But once you don't have to get married, you really have tied one hand behind your back in terms of trying to, do something about, bringing back marriage or whatever it is we're trying to do here. Because, even something like a negotiation between one, a man and a woman relative to the subject, well, what leverage do either of them really have if the other person's like, I'm out, right? If there isn't, dad on the porch with a shotgun, right? Louise Perry with her book on the basically a case against the sexual revolution. She talks about the dramatic decline of shotgun marriages immediately after the advent of the pill. That was a forcing function, right? So and this is kind of where you were going with that, Eamon, right? With that idea that, like, if there's no structure that enforces, first, the expectation that you should be getting married, and two, once you're in it, get back in there and fight it out, like, stay in the marriage, right? If neither one of those things are happening, unless you're proposing to bring back that kind of forcing function, which, as I said in our last call, like, I don't know that we're going to recreate a world where, you allow people to become coerced again into things that they don't want to do. Like, I'm not sure we get there. Then the only thing you can do is turn it into something so appealing that, you'd be crazy not to at least try.
Because the other thing we don't have is we used to have that compelling force culturally, but we also had supportive forces, right? You also had the family that would tell you how to get along well. You'd have the husband out working with his dad and his brother-in-laws and whoever, and the wife would go off and usually work with the other women, weaving or whatever they were going to do. And so you also had these other social norms that supported the marriage and maintained enough broader social connection that there wasn't as much pressure placed on marriage as there is now. Because part of what's hard about marriage now is it's so idealized that it has to bear the weight of almost all of your dreams and hopes and plans, especially because we don't have much of a spiritual vision anymore. So most of our spiritual vision gets collapsed into the romantic field. And so now the romantic partner has to carry all of your hopes and dreams, and all your visions of glory are in the romantic. Now, not for everyone, but by and large, culturally, we've decided that that's the appropriate place for it. And people put the pressure on that. Whereas in the past, not only would people give you wisdom and advice, you also had a societal vision that was more broad. You weren't expected to be best friends with your husband. You weren't expected to be the best lover ever, the hottest person ever, forever. Like there weren't these expectations on the marital relationship that we now have. And because we move around so much, people usually don't have those social connections just because they've lived in different places throughout their life. And so there is no structure like that for most people to go back to, even if they wanted to. So to say, let's just rewind the clock, I think it would be incredibly naive. That those things that just aren't there.
By the way, Paul, just a technical matter. Do you have the ability to boost their mic at all?
We can
No.
get closer.
Just,
Not with this setup.
okay. No worries. Yeah, just having I can hear you, but it's just you're a little soft.
There's so much there. Rod, how, when you mentioned that basically the government with no fault divorce, the government decided to get out of the enforcing. Now the government might do some enforcing in terms of bringing children into the world, but they're no longer going to sort of lean on people to stay together and prop up the marriage. And then I see sort of even though these things didn't sort of arise at the same time, or maybe not, but the overbidding of marriage that you just talked about, Catherine. If now there's nothing mandatory about it, well, now in order to sell it, we're going to have to crank the knob up to 11, and we're gonna overclock it, and we're gonna push it beyond what it can bear, which then leads to all kinds of other difficulties. It was on Jacob's channel that when I was talking with Jacob, or it was myself or someone else, and he was talking about the relationship between Judaism or at least pre-Christian Jewish religion. Christianity comes in with Jesus, who, contrary, a lot of other people look in, is it Mary Magdalene? I mean, where's your wife? And Paul, where's his wife? And then, of course, you have monastic traditions, which have, vows of celibacy. So Christianity does come on the scene with carving out a space for singleness that wasn't there before Jesus. Yet, even in the Gospels, part of the advantage of having Rod here, even though he's not a church-going man necessarily, he knows his Bible really well. So when Jesus gives such a high view of the commitment of marriage, his disciples sort of fall back and basically say then, almost from a manosphere position, well, who then would want to be married? But you're within this cultural container where, in all kinds of practical reasons, there's just so much work that needs to be done. You're not really going to survive as an individual. And today, with the affluence, the technology, the social safety net, all of those things, we now afford individuals. There was, what video was it? But it might have been Grim Grizz, talking about the fact that wasn't Grim Grizz. It was Cale and Rod Dreher talked about basically the fact that, the way the government has stepped in, they've basically given us the ability to live this way. And I don't know, Rod, often you talked about, in your talk, you talked about the liberal project. I don't know if that's sort of what you're thinking of when the couple of times that you mentioned the liberal project.
Yeah. By the way, maybe I'll address that, but I have to share a little personal story. So my wife, after we did our last talk, she watched our talk. Supportive thing to do. And afterwards, and we shared it with a friend of hers, a single woman. Afterwards, she said, well, I'll admit that I basically watched it to be supportive, right? I was just trying to be supportive. And because, she knows me, she's like, I didn't really think I was going to learn anything, right? But she really surprised me. And I don't think she'll mind me sharing this. She says, I couldn't believe how much I learned. And so our entire conversation, she specifically referred to you, Catherine, so thank you. But she said, I guess I'd never really thought about what marriage was for. Like, it wouldn't have even occurred to me to ask, right? Like, the entire frame of like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
was anathema to the way she had come into the topic. For her, it's just what you did, right? So, and of course, she entered the dating world She's about 10 years younger than me. So when that wasn't at all necessarily what people were doing. I mean, some people were still very marriage minded, but there were a lot of people who that wasn't automatic, right? So, and found the whole thing kind of mystifying, right? Like, how do you even tell whether someone is or is not serious about the subject and all that, right? So, hopefully you'll see why I'm introducing that, because in a sense we have a test case, right? You know, she's married to me, and she's basically saying, like, I never really thought about why you do it, you know, other than it's just what you do, right? Which you might say is the exact thing you'd expect from the liberal project, right? Which is, you don't do things unless you have good reasons for doing those things, and you're not going to be co-opted or coerced. You're not going to be manipulated into something that's not in your best interest, or not, you know, an expression of your, as you say, sacred self, you know, your authentic self. And so anything that's going to act against that is at least going to be challenged, right? You're going to at least be skeptical about anything that might interfere with the, you know, the full expression of your uniqueness.
Well, and so part of, you know, since we've been talking about this, I've been spending a little bit more time intentionally looking at videos from certain perspectives. And so some of the manosphere stuff, there's a generational thing going on. And now, and all of us are old in a way. I'm the oldest of us here. But when I listen to some of the manosphere videos where they are basically debating not how to be married, not even sort of whether to be married, but whether it's even responsible to consider the institution. And of course, once you put that ought in there of responsibility, it's like, okay, well, what's the telos there? What's the thing? And of course, it's pure, you know, self-realization in terms of, you know, all kinds of things. And well, marriage is a bad thing for men. Okay, certainly the statistics don't bear that out, but marriage is a bad thing for men because it's probably not going to last, and the women are going to get your money, so you're much better off. And that really sets up Louise Perry's book, which I think she makes a terrifically strong argument that the sexual revolution and at least a certain degree of feminism has been really bad for women. I forget who here talked about financially the deep implications of, you know, living apart. And it's a bad deal out there. And the fact that I regularly see, now that I have a lot more contact with people in their 20s and 30s than I did before then, I see many, many women living with men, and they've got this little, you know, once they get out of college, they're like, if they've had grad school or some kind of professional school, they're, you know, 23, 24, they got about a 10-year window in there. And now they're going to, you know, try and boost a career. So that's going to take another 5, and that's going to put them in their 30s. They still haven't sort of made up their mind on what they want to do. And it's like, you're living with dudes. You're just burning through your years. And, you know, to get back to this question of accountability, you're not a very smart negotiator with these men. These men are running the show here, ladies. And you're just not being smart, even about your own self-interests.
Well, in the manosphere, it seems to me that the telos, sometimes it's explicit, but it always seems to be implicit, is just get as much sex as you can. Like, just, you know, bet as many as you can, hang in there. If you work on yourself, you'll be able to sleep around a lot. And it doesn't really go beyond that. And I think that that's part of the motivation for the interest in all the evolutionary psychology, because it's like, okay, let's just look at instincts, and now we can justify our instincts. Because see, we have a story. We have our own sort of creation myth here. Sort of like my grandpa, you know, saying to me, well, you know, hey, they can't help it. And, you know, the flip side of that, could be. Well, and and guys can't help it either. And so, just go about your way. And as much as society holds up marriage in a way as like something you want to go for, at the same time, it's like you're being tempted in the desert. It's like, oh yeah, here you can get all the sex you want, and there's many avenues to get it. We have pornography, hookup apps. There's ongoing conversations about legalized prostitution, and on the other side of it, for women, these are ways you can get resources from government, or make sure you're stable within yourself. And it's I'm very suspicious of the manosphere and what's sort of driving it as far as a principality. And it seems like it's valid because it's grounded in science. But I think there's a lot going on there that's not discussed.
Full disclosure, by the way, I lived with my now wife before we were married. Just feel out of some sort of intellectual honesty, I should acknowledge that. Well, yes, but they also have a point, right?
Yes.
So the extremes of the manosphere are kind of easy to, it's just kind of a cesspool of misogyny and anger and bitterness and pain. But the contract, the implied contract, many of the things that men might be, let's put it this way. As I said earlier, she had a pretty clear idea of what she was looking for. She had basically no idea what I was looking for. And why would she? Like, who cares what a guy wants, right? It turns out that if you're, my comments in the last, conversation about being a young woman with, with the world of options laid out for you, well, the same is true if you're a little bit of an older guy where, right, maybe you've figured some things out. Well, why exactly would you get married, right? Well, I can think of a bunch of things that would be really, really nice, but I'm afraid to say them out loud in public, almost all of them. And they're not the things you might be thinking. It's nothing, it's not sex. It's, sure, but it's things like just the quality of the experience. If I use the word receptive, for example, like that's a word that I think really captures something about the way a man responds to a woman. If she's receptive, if you're buying what I'm selling, right? Like that's a great feeling for a guy. Like this is working. She's laughing at my jokes. It's going well, right? But I could go on. There's other things in terms of the quality of that experience that are extremely controversial now. Just the sort of the what a man might describe as a good experience with a woman relationally. If you say it out loud, you're already feeding into the patriarchy, right? You're already contributing to the oppressive system, right? And so the point that maybe the less extreme voices of for a while there, it was the MGTOW thing, right? Men going their own way. That was more, it seemed, guys who maybe actually had the option, but decided not to, right? It wasn't necessarily that they were the incels or whatever, right? So they do have a point, which is this is like really not a good deal for men. And it's beyond divorce court. It's also just like, why would you, right?
Yes.
And I think, to bounce off your point about women and what men are looking for in women, I think part of the challenge is that femininity is so shameful in our culture, right? Women are shamed for being feminine. You can't even mention the feminine qualities you would like because they're so shameful. We're not even allowed to talk about them. And I don't know what your list is, but I would assume things like submissive, soft, gentle.
Cooperative. Can we say cooperative?
Cooperative, sure. But even talking in that category, like you said, that is potentially like wildfire culturally, but those are traditionally the postures, the relational stance that were associated and expected from women, and most women held. And I think, it's a quick breeze through, old English literature to see that was what was valued, not just by men in women, but by other women in women. That was not seen as something shameful. It was something that women could be honored for, their gentle spirit, their receptivity, whatever, and I'm sure there's different flavors. Of course, people always like different things, but I think you're right that even saying, oh, I would like that in a wife, it's very taboo. And I find it frankly annoying as a woman that being feminine and embracing things like cooperation or submission, or however you want to nuance it, is seen as something you should be ashamed of, as if it's a relinquishing of your agency or a relinquishing of personal dignity instead of a posture one can choose to take and enjoy. But culturally, that is so off the table that it really hamstrings conversations like this.
Another thing that comes up in the manosphere a lot is and we kind of alluded to this a little bit the last time, is like, oh, you like me now, do you? Right? Like sort of watching. I have a good friend who has 3 young adult sons. They're in their early 20s. And the first thing they do when they meet a girl is they go check out her socials. And if there's a lot of, bikini pics and things like that, you might say they form some conclusions, right? So they're watching all this play out, and it's influencing their opinion of the entire enterprise and their opinion of women and all of that, right? And I think it's worth inserting here this idea of settling. It's time to settle down. How would you like to be the one where you knew that she'd settled on you, right? That, you sort of, you run the gauntlet, and then there's some point where magically, the music stops and everybody finds a seat, and well, you'll do. So I heard somebody say this, and I just loved it, that men are romantics masquerading as pragmatists, and women are pragmatists masquerading as romantics.
That's good.
All the great love literature, all the great love poems, all the songs. I mean, it's all men, right? It's men pouring their hearts out. These poor schmucks, right? So the reality is, men are deeply romantic, and when they decide on a woman, kind of my little, he liked her pretty blue eyes, right? He could write an entire lifetime of a narrative around her just based on that first impression, that first thought he had about her when he met her. And as long as she didn't do anything to disavow him of that, they could do a lifetime together. He'd be as devoted to her 60 years later as he was the day that he laid eyes on her, right? So, and Paul, we talked about this on our first conversation. I think we did anyway.
Yeah, we did.
I started to sort of think about marriage as like a historic overlay. We live in a neighborhood here where there's been a ton of gentrification, a lot of new building, a lot of houses, they're knocking down the old houses, putting up big ones. And people started to get upset about this. So they passed this historical overlay, right? So you can't just build whatever you want, right? They're trying to at least slow down the process, right? So there's a more approval process, and relevant as we are working on a remodel. So we're sort of going through like what you can and cannot do. And it made me think of like marriage is kind of like that too, right? It's like you can almost imagine the how it would emerge from the history of human civilization, as you have these raging hormones, and you have all the young men of the village are all killing each other over the same girl. And it's like, no, we can't have this, right? You can almost see like how norms would start to come into place to just kind of regulate the whole thing, because it's just a free-for-all, and there's just too much instability because of the nature of being young, and you're coursing with hormones and attraction and all that, right? And so what we've done, somewhat successfully, is convince young people to sort of wait all that out, get through till you're in your late 20s, at least early 30s. So basically when you're not really that motivated. And now's the time to start thinking about this thing, that when you think about it rationally, you're like, I don't know about this. This doesn't sound as appealing, right? So he said, no, trust me. When you're older, you'll be glad, right? Right? But you can almost see how an institution that probably was designed to constrain some of the chaotic forces of that, just the drive, right, and all that goes into that, where young boys and girls are like magnets, just snapping together and creating all kinds of mayhem. You can almost see a system emerge, like, oh, we gotta regulate this somehow, and that's, there's your enforced monogamy, right, anthropologically. And so we get, we get through all that, and now you're at a point where in your right mind, and now you're going to make a sensible choice, right? And theory being that you'll still want the institution, you'll just make a better choice. Well, for a whole lot of people, it just means that now that I've had time to think about it, I'm not sure I want to do this, right? So that whole concept of settling, meaning we just wait till you kind of have sowed your oats, and now you're ready to sort of take the whole thing more seriously. I mean, who's going to argue with that, right? But it does have one of these effects, which is once you are thinking sensibly, well, you're just maybe not as inclined to do
it. I think part of what's I think this is true of many of the conversations that we're having, that we can't have this conversation without sort of imagining in Spanish, there's fulano. Fulano is sort of like John Doe or Jane Doe. A fulano, which is kind of this typical young man, and knowing individuals. I mean, I have one child in his 30s, and all the rest are in their 20s right now. 3 boys and three men and 2 women. And one of the things when we talk in generalizations, while as always the case with generalizations, there's validity to them. Of course, your mileage may vary for every single individual. And whereas in a sense, when the context in which I grew up where there was enforced celibacy until marriage, not terribly hard, not tremendously enforced, but at least an assumption of it. No sex before marriage, no living together before marriage, and that then motivation to have licit sex was a strong motivation for marriage. People let's not wait around here. Let's get on with it. Let's get married, and then let's have children. And that whole vision was very healthy in the culture then yet. That settling certainly happened because it's like, I need somebody. And at least at Calvin College, female students at the college had to really watch out for those single seminarians, of which I was one, because a lot of these dudes knew, boy, if they didn't find a wife when they were in college, they might not even have a job when they get out, because who wants to hire a single minister? And just the radical way in which the world has changed since then, the pervasive acceptance of cohabitation, which again, the social research is not positive on. It's not. There's a lot of question about it, but and also, although the reality that generally speaking, young marriages, it's a little dicier, because the 2 people, do they really know each other that well? And they sort of jump in and go. But I think in many ways, a lot of these statistics don't really identify the sort of social relevance realization of what's happening. It's been very interesting. So most of the now significant others of my adult children also come from intact 2-parent households, which is really interesting. And, it's kind of swinging back to the divorce question in this. Divorce is not spread evenly throughout the society at all. You have individuals with multiple divorces, and you have others, and some people will say, well, but isn't it true that religious versus non-religious doesn't really impact whether or not they're heading for divorce? Well, actually, some of the studies that I've seen is that the very religious tend to stay together at much higher levels than, let's say, the nominals who aren't particularly going to church or it's not changing their life. So figuring out how to talk about this in the abstract is really difficult, especially on, let's say, the other side of the screen, when someone's listening to us and let's say they're young and single and they're asking, what should I do? Should I marry? Should I not marry? We have a sexual marketplace, but most of what I've seen about the sexual marketplace has meant that it's acting like a marketplace, and the haves are getting more and the have-nots are getting less. So this is so difficult.
So I thought it was great, your little line, Rod, with the men are romantics posing as pragmatists and women are the reverse. And I think you revealed the fact that I am a pragmatist. I'm also romantic. But when you were like, well, who wants to have somebody just settle for you? I was like, that sounds great. What's wrong with having someone settle for you? Why is that a problem?
It depends what I think about the person who's settling, right? Where you're like, I'm just happy to be here.
No, we have these heroic narratives where we have the key that unlocks her heart. Only we have that key, right? Like that a lot of men think this way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But then I thought, I wouldn't like someone to settle for me if what that meant was we both were locking arms for the modern vision of marriage, to kind of pull the conversation back to the beginning again. Because if you're just settling for me and you get tired of what I have to offer and you weren't really sold on me in the first place, then that's probably not going to last very long. But if you are willing to settle for me and stop searching around for the ideal that probably only exists in your head or in a magazine somewhere, and you would settle into my vision of marriage, which means we're committed, we're doing this thing, and we're going to make it about more than just us, then I love it, because I'm like, oh yeah, well, you're going to get attached to me. You're going to enjoy me. I'm going to make sure you have a great time. We're going to build a life together, and then you're not going to want to go anywhere. So I don't mind if you settle, because that's just the beginning. That's not the pinnacle I was trying to reach. We're just getting building at this point. So I
was just going to say, it was just the flimsiest of hunches that made me want to include you in this conversation, because we had talked that one time. I am so glad.
No, I knew she needed to be here.
Yeah, I mean, you really do such a great job of articulating that thing that's hard for us to talk about. But anyway, sorry.
Well, thanks, Rod.
We didn't settle for you, Catherine.
Oh, good.
Well, and Catherine and I have talked about, when we initially got together, the different perspectives we came from, because I believe it was one of her relatives that said to her, Catherine, you could have almost anybody you want. So, like, why are you with him? Are you sure you want to do this?
And somehow you found out about this.
Yeah, she told me.
Remember that keep no record of Ron's things? Remember those lists we got?
But
I'd be like, why are you telling me this?
Oh no. Brace myself. But I think you said something to the effect of like, well, you saw what I could become.
Well, yeah, I said, well, it was my grandfather, who's now passed, and he married us. But what I told him was, well, I picked him because I could have who I wanted, and I wanted him. And then I think I felt so flustered, I just left. But what I was thinking was, it's true he wasn't, like, I don't know, you were like 20 when we were dating, right? Yeah. So it's like you hadn't completed a degree, you hadn't like accomplished anything.
Let's remind the audience that he was looking for a woman with a few knocks on her too. That's
right. That's right. Taking my father's advice.
So I was already starting with an edge.
Yes.
So it's like, yeah, I could, as a young woman, have found a guy who already had established himself and was well in his career and had a house, and I was at the point in the sexual marketplace where I could have gone shopping. But building from the beginning what you're looking for, and this goes to what you said at the end of your letter, Rod, you're asking what will make a good husband? Like, what are the character traits? What are the qualities of somebody that will make a good husband? And that's different than I'm going to find somebody with an established setup I can just slip into. Now, that might be part of the package in somebody's mind, but they're not exactly the same thing.
Well, you're saying something important here, which is there's a difference when someone has explored all their options and they arrive at you as the best of those options. While we're all hyper-connected, we're all on social media, we're all aware that, oh, well, maybe your options have changed a year ago, right? So like the idea that someone has said, having reviewed all of my options, I've picked you, versus long before I'm a known commodity, I'm making a bet on you, right? There's just a complete difference between waiting until you kind of know how the story goes before you pick the winner. And so that idea of, loyalty, picking the dark horse, right? And going back to my sort of historical overlay idea, I think that that's one of the functions that marriage used to serve, which is, yeah, I know he's kind of scrawny and pimply and, he doesn't much going for him yet. So you're going to have to look for all kinds of signs like he's going to amount to something someday, right? So it's going to be other things, his character, his family, he's a hard worker, something. You're going to have to sort of figure it out, because if you wait until he's the successful doctor with a large practice and he's 40, 45 years old, and then you decide you want him, well, guess what? Like, so do a lot of other people, right? So you're letting him know, I'm going to make a bet on you before I know how the story ends. And the same thing goes for women, right? If she just takes advantage of all of her options, well, that to the person she ends up with, that says something to him about her, right? Like, even if you're the winner in that exchange, it's sort of like after all the other merchandise has been sampled. So it's a different thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to add to that, part of that too is if you're making the bet on the dark horse, you're also making the bet and you're the trainer. You get to decide what you're feeding the horse and how you stable the horse and the environment the horse is in. And would I rather be with a guy in his 40s who's a doctor and has been single and lonely for 30 years, or a guy in his 40s who's maybe not a doctor, but maybe a doctor, but maybe just, middle of the road, but he's been loved and cared for and felt connected for the last 30 years. What type of situation and what kind of man do you want to be married to 30 years, probably 20 years down the road? Probably somebody who's been loved, and the best way to make them that person who's been loved is to love them for that long. Yeah.
Talk more about that word love.
Mm.
You're using it like we all know what it means. I think I know what you mean, but I still think it would be great to expand on that.
Well, I tweeted about it the other day. And I'll say what I tweeted and then I'll talk about it a little bit. I said that our current use of love, what we mean in modern society is enjoy, consume, and purchase. Or not purchase, possess. So when we talk about loving now, it's like, oh, I loved that movie. I love that woman. I want to have her. I want to consume her. I want to possess her. But the way I mean it is what I think it more traditionally in a Christian culture meant, which was I cherish you. I want to make you flourish. I want the best for you. I want to create an environment that allows everything good in you to grow and prunes out the bad stuff. And I want, I just have so much affection for you. Like, I really like you, which is different than love, because love is about, it's like a commitment. It's a choice for action into those things that are best for the other person. But it doesn't necessarily include affection for the person or enjoyment of the person. And so ideally in a marriage, you also have that kind of affection as well, like the warmth and the kindness too. So when I say, you've been bathing in love, it's not that I've been consuming you and possessing you and I've been enjoying you, although hopefully I've also been enjoying, but that I've been caring for you for that long.
Imagine liking somebody that you're married to.
I know.
What a concept.
What a concept. I often find in marriage counseling, there's just a lot of people that they're committed to their spouse, but they don't really like them.
They don't like them. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even though they stood in front of their friends and family at one point and said something quite to the contrary.
Mm-hmm. And maybe they used to like him, but it's been 8 years.
Yeah.
Well, and how might that happen, right? I should introduce. I have one of my little. You've heard of the what is it? The golden rule, right? Treat people the way you want to be treated. There's the golden hour. There's a lot of golden things. I came up with the golden formula, which is a little bit different, which is the way you treat a person is proportional to how important that relationship is. Mm-hmm. So think of the people who are like, you made me think of it because, think of all the people who they don't really like their spouse, right? They don't really like their life, right? So they're just rude, dismissive, just generally invalidating, difficult, right? They'll bump into somebody at the grocery store that they served on a jury with like 7 years ago. They haven't seen them since, and they'll act like they're long lost friends. Like, oh my God, how have you been? And how's right? And there's like they just exude warmth and sunshine and delight for someone who doesn't matter at all in their lives. And then as soon as they get home, they kick the dog, or they're just generally dismissive or unkind to their partners. So the golden formula is basically, if it's not that important, really, of course, be polite, of course, basic civility, of course, but you give all the best you got to the ones who are most important. So obviously that's your spouse, that's your kids, that's your coworkers, that's your boss, it's your neighbor. I mean, and you almost like there's a dial, right? And so like, depending on how important the relationship is, you very deliberately give the most and the best you have to the ones who are the most important to you. I'm sure as Christians, you're going to tell me why this is a flawed philosophy, but it points to this idea, which is if you want to have a good marriage, we'll start by treating them as if you like them, right? And shockingly, you'll probably like them a lot more, and they'll probably like you a lot.
Yeah.
And you said something key there, Rod, where you said, giving them the best you've got, and working with couples. I'm often asking myself the question, like, is that the best they've got? And maybe it is.
Yeah.
And if that's the best they've got, then how can that be nurtured? How can the best they've got be developed into something that's better that they can give? And that goes to Paul, what you were saying about the different groups we're speaking to, that you can't just speak to everyone generally. There are people coming from different backgrounds, and you're going to say very different things to them, and the math that they're doing is different, and their capacities are really different, which I think it's some of what Scott Adams was kind of honing in on in his tweets about marriage and why it's no longer a good deal for men. And he has a point about people being functional to a certain degree. I'm curious what he believes the conditions are for people being functional and what he means by that, because I see people who, depending on your rubric, have very chaotic lives, are very low functioning in many ways, and they've been together for like 40 years. And people who are seemingly have a lot of it together, and they can't last in a marriage. But yeah, that question of what's the best you've got, and that's That's the $1,000,000 question that usually you're asking of the other person. Is that the best they've got? Or are they holding something out on me? And can I see what it is that they're offering and how sincere and the depth of it? Yeah.
It's interesting. There's so many layers to this. So the consumer culture, where that consumer posture, I think, Rod, you laid it out quite nicely at the beginning, is so we instrumentalize the other. And in a funny way, in a marriage, you can't not instrumentalize the other. And even for Catherine's beautiful vision of, well, yeah, Eamon, yeah, look at him now, but he's got potential. I can see it in him. And and so Eamon would be instrumental for Catherine's vision of, again, something beyond her, something she wanted to build. And then all those qualities, those lists, Rob, that you started talking about. Well, I'm looking for someone who can make and keep commitments. I can look for someone who can delay gratification. It was interesting. I haven't seen much of Andrew Tate on the internet, but one day I was like, who's Andrew Tate? So I Google thing. One of the things that Andrew Tate said in one of these videos is, the greatest quality a man can have is to say no to a woman. And I thought, well, that's interesting. On one hand, he's saying something very true, that men need to have self-control so that because that's the context, that they can say no to a woman. But at the same time, all of these values that we say, okay, self-sacrificial, and part of it's these qualities that all of our heroes, we value our heroes for the character developed through processes we would never want our children subjected to. Mm-hmm. And marriage is full of those opportunities. Dale Cooper was the chaplain at Calvin College when I was a student there, and he would regularly tell stories about his parents. His father and mother were West Michigan farmers, which was not uncommon in the day. And his mother got polio and lived decades of their marriage in an iron lung. And his father was together with the church, because again, the church, a rural West Michigan farming community, those people knew how to pull together. That, especially in that period, that church pulled together. And Dale Cooper would talk, it would just amaze us as students about the love that his father had for his mother, who lived for decades of their marriage in an iron lung. And that's, of course, it's in that lung that she died. And when we hear that, marriage is this, it's a thing far above us and beyond us that we could only hope to aspire to. Yet, if one of my kids married someone and suddenly their spouse is debilitated and crippled and they're going to care for them for 40 years, I'd be thinking, maybe it's good we're in a go on and move on. Even though on one hand, part of me would say, no, you've made a promise, you hold to this promise. And if you meet this challenge can make of you something that you can't imagine ever becoming. But you're like, what? Like having a six-pack or having a lot of money? No, being the kind of person that people will talk about generations later because of your virtue, love, commitment, and sacrifice. And that's all out there too. But again, to a certain degree, that hasn't been lost in our culture. But boy.
Well, you see, there is the consumer sort of capitalistic way of understanding relationships. Then there is a group of people that are trying to define marriage around their trauma. which doesn't really work either. I'm not going to let this happen to me ever again. And on the one hand, completely understandable. I hear horror stories all the time. Everyone knows somebody who's been in a really horrific marriage, and yet that doesn't give you any vision. And if you try to have well, I'm going to have all these safety pieces around me, I'm not going to be taken advantage of. You're building it from a negative, and that means you don't really build anything.
When we were hanging up last time, I think we'd already stopped recording, but I made a comment that I thought that the Catholics kind of got it about right by making marriage a sacrament, and that might even be ahistorical because I'm no expert. And the Mormons seem to have also really, made marriage and family kind of, it's not exactly Christian in a way. If a lot of, as Paul often points out, it's like a very specific kind of Christianity, where they've really celebrated marriage as this sort of at the top of the hierarchy. But I do think that, and you're pointing at it, Catherine, when you're talking the way you're talking, right? I can feel it. It's something within me stirs, right? When you talk this way, because you're pointing at something that's enchanted, right? Mm-hmm. There's something beautiful about the redemptive quality of two people coming together and forming something that shapes them. It's like a 1 + 1 is 3, 1 + 1 is 5, is 10. Well, you could be you could Abraham was the father of nations, right? Like you can sort of take that idea all the way out to who knows, right? But this sort of beautiful idea that, the imaginary first date, a man and a woman sit across from each other, they've just met, and all of the possibilities lay out in front of them. From, you don't get past the appetizer. It's like, check please, right? It's just like, this is not going anywhere, right? All the way to, think of all of the things. Well, is this, something going to happen here? Like, how's this going, right? And then you wonder if they're going to call. All of the things that could, second date, a third date, all the way up to, decades later, you're watching your grandkids all around you. And the sheer beauty of what can come of two people coming together. And so I could sound very romantic when I talk that way, right? Because you mentioned earlier about like getting seduced by the kind of romance, the sort of Disney version of love. But there is something profoundly if we don't want to use the word romantic, but there's something profoundly, I'll just say romantic because I don't have a better word, that is profoundly inspiring if you can see that, right? If you can see what can come of that. And we find ourselves inspired. Suddenly, a man is 10 feet tall, right? Like he realizes oh, she needs me. Like I can help her, or I can do something here. I can matter. I can amount to something, right? Mm-hmm. If it's important to you, well, now it's important to me, right? Like that, whatever that is, right? And so there is something really beautiful about that is worth, finding new ways to talk about. Maybe we're going to have to find secular terms to talk about it. But it really is a beautiful idea.
Catherine, your definitions there that you had on Twitter, of course you have eros and phileo, eros being sort of Vervaeke does a nice job of it in his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And, I've clipped on my channel the agape. But, and what you really laid out there is this agapic vision of it's self-donating love. And, part of the Protestants didn't accept marriage as a sacrament, but I think there was some compensation for that in the early Reformation, where they basically called marriage the little church, because of course it was Luther who left the monastery, closed the monasteries, and the nuns and the monks settled up, as it were. And it's interesting how now as we're in a point where there's a degree of anxiety about the disruption of marriage in our culture, and the pessimism towards marriage in our culture, to recognize that as a group, this sort of self-donating agapic love is simply so essential to be practiced, in lots of different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Parents to children, husbands to wives, neighbor to neighbor. And without that sort of constant happening, we rented a couple of years ago, we rented an Airbnb that was it was in Washington State. It was right on the water. And there's this little lagoon, this little estuary right in front of the Airbnb. And it was full of crabs. I mean, you could almost just hear them, ticking away down there. There's just so many of them doing all their little things. But you almost need that just ticking away of agapic love just through a society if you're going to have that health to pick up. In a church like mine, you just need people who are brimming with the desire to help someone else, to be around, because there's so many people that just need a little help, but also to do it wisely. And part of what happens then also in marriage is, hopefully the two people find that they can play different roles in that. So it's not always one person doing for the other, but the other gets to play the sacrificial, self-donating part, and they can go back and forth and do that for each other. And also have not only the agapic love, but also the phileo love, where you're doing stuff together. Maybe you're taking a car trip, or maybe you're working on a project, and it's cleaning the house, or it's taking care of, you got too many kids that you're both, it's all hands on deck, and you're doing it side by side. And then it's also the erotic, and you have all of love sort of fully energized and enabled. And I think that's part of why the brilliance and glory of marriage is so durable and difficult to fully dispel, even though all of us regularly see marriages that are like, boy, I'm glad I'm not in that thing.
So is Paul now the king of metaphors? Agapic love as a place overrun with crabs?
Oh no.
Yeah. I mean, it is lifeblood, right? And if it stops flowing, then necrosis creeps in pretty quickly, and there's death. And that's why you get what Catherine's saying. It's like, if you don't start at that point, you don't have a live marriage to begin with. There's no lifeblood.
Can we go back to your Andrew Tate comment?
Yeah.
I know less about him than even you do, but my sense anyway is that he's quite angry. But that particular thing that you chose to pull out, which is, something like being able to say no to a woman. And I'm thinking, well, actually, that sounds about right. Right? Maybe this is because Twitter, the algorithm, right? Like, because like you all, I'm thinking about this a lot. So I'm like finding things on Twitter and sharing them. So maybe it's just that, or maybe it's something's happening, because it's like I'm seeing things come up a lot. There's this sort of like trad section of Twitter where people are talking about, and there's some of the sort of trad thing is women saying no again to men, and if a man is a real man, he'll accept no for an answer, right? Which of course is true. but it feels a little bit like a cope, frankly. I was thinking, like, actually, there is something profoundly powerful about a man who will say no to a woman, right? And every woman knows this. My version of this was you have to be able to demonstrate that you're not afraid of her anger, which is sort of another way of saying, I think something similar, right? Which is, you are who you are, and you have whatever it is that you see, or whatever it is you believe, or what you think, or what you have to say. You say it without rancor. You're not out to hurt anybody, but you have to be able to stand your ground and listen, of course, and be receptive to feedback, but you can't be tiptoeing around afraid of her or her anger. And you certainly can't be led around by something as basic as, simple attraction, right? Like you have to demonstrate that you can withstand the temptation, right? So in a weird sort of way, I wouldn't say it with a manosphere's, angst. But I would say that actually, if you want to give advice to young men, it's the ultimate power move to be able to resist that temptation. You'll instantly be taken more seriously. Instantly.
Well, I often say that, all this power talk that we have going on in our culture, it's just so impoverished, partly because, people don't have a vision for feminine power. And one man might be able to dominate another, and if he's very strong, but usually not two men, but a woman can control a room full of men. And that's, actually, Catherine, you're the second woman today that gave me the complaint of, why is our culture basically downvoting women expressing femininity? You're the second woman to say that to me today in just a frustrating way. And, oh, is this the patriarchy speaking with that downvoting? I don't think so. And yeah, so.
What do you think it is speaking?
So I sent a video to Rod I've been watching some Chris Williamson, and he's had some interesting people on his show talking about. He had Rob Henderson on, and I follow Rob on Twitter, and I very much he pulls up some very interesting stuff on Twitter, and he talked about the fact that something that Peterson had mentioned, that men and women sort of socially construct together the dynamics between them, not individually. They do it in groups. And of course, Rene Girard and his mimetic ideas, they're very much in this. All of the, once one man is interested in a woman, she's suddenly attractive to many more men. And women, this interesting study where they rated all these men in terms of attractiveness, but then there was some sort of way in which the men were showing aggressiveness, and it's those men that seem to actually be preferred by the women in action. And so we're disconnected from ourselves. So there's just so much mystery in all of this. There's a blogger named Richard Beck, who his blog is Experimental Theology. It's been around for years. He's one of the best bloggers I know. He's been blogging on Louise Perry's book, and in one of his, I actually tried to find it here, one of his blog posts, he talked about the fact that what Louise Perry's book is really about is disenchantment, and that what we sort of did was disenchant. Let's disenchant sex, because then we take the power out of all this patriarchal stuff that we had flowing before. But when we disenchanted it, we just turned it again, as you said, Rod, into a marketplace. And suddenly, it's that old joke where, would you sleep for me for X amount of money? Is it $1 million? Is it $50? Is it somewhere in between? Let's haggle about the price. And if sex is disenchanted, and if in fact, if sex is disenchanted, suddenly commitment, meaning, the difference between buying your car if you have cash in your pocket and taking a car note. Commitment is in a sense the biggest deal out there now. And Catherine, what you said about Eamon is basically, I didn't look at him in terms of what he was now. I looked at him in terms of what we could become. And in many ways that takes you away from the marketplace, because even with dating apps now, I saw again another woman on Chris's channel was talking about the fact that it used to be when you went to college, you sort of had, here is a pen full. When I went to Calvin College, 4,000 students, about 2,000 female students, and there's a limited number to pick from. Now suddenly you go to Harvard and you're looking for a Harvard man. You're competing with all of Boston on the apps, and so again, back to that idea of settling. Now it's like, I'm not a statistic. I'm one person. And before me aren't a million men. There are really sort of 3 or 4 that are actually, I have real life interactions with. And you know what? Eamon's the top of that list. And, maybe I'll wait around a year or 2 or 3 to sort of optimize. And that's where time gets into this. If I don't commit, maybe something better will come along later. And basically the idea, I remember, I've told the story before on the channel. I was a single seminarian. I was dating the woman who would be my wife. And I remember doing the psych eval, because you had to do that at the beginning of seminary, to find out who's a psychopath and all of those things. One of my friends decided he was going to answer the most ridiculous questions on these things. He had a very long time with the psychologist there. I enjoy hurting small animals. Yes. Oh, okay. Do you really? We don't want you in the ministry. But I remember, nothing really showed up on my psych evals or anything. And so I got an hour with the psychologist, and, we just talked about something. And his main message to me in that little thing was, you could probably stand with making a commitment and keeping it, which means settling, which means, okay, well, how do I know a year from now someone better than Eamon won't come along? Sorry, Eamon. How do I know? And it's like, I'm not gonna, that's a wrong way to look at life. I'm gonna say, today I begin, and I begin with you. If you'll have me and we decide to do it together, and this is where we're gonna go. And again, this again also comes back to the question of, there's a fair amount of commonality between us in terms of what this project is. And I think that's another aspect in which the internet has sort of disrupted us, because as has pluralism, as has globalization, what is marriage? Well, here's 10 ways that are out there that people are defining marriage, at least implicitly. Well, you and your partner had better be together on one. And then the question, will you both maintain that definition for how long together? And if in fact one of you decides to have a major life change, will you stay together still? In other words, does the commitment even transcend that initial vision, which 2 people who frankly didn't have any idea what marriage was anyway, does that commitment even transcend that? Oh, it's a big thing.
One of the things I wanted to hear more from Eamon about, because that was sort of your response to my little preamble, is that you were skeptical about sort of evolutionary psychology as an answer or partial answer to this, because I'll admit I'm at least I'm intrigued by that possibility, that a more expansive understanding broadly throughout society of kind of like how we got here and how we have the drives we have and what the sort of potential evolutionary explanations might be for that. It will help us understand ourselves better and help us understand our interlocutors better. Just a little bit of a point of clarification. You might have been trying to say this, Paul, but just to kind of to clarify it on that point that Rob was making to Chris, what I think he was saying was that when you asked women to rate men based on their attractiveness, and then you asked men to rate other men, and I forget what the criteria were, but basically
basically about physical violence, how
So,
formidable
yeah.
they looked.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you watched like these men in their actual, dating results, say that the women's predictions of what they would find attractive did not correlate at all with the actual results. But what did was the men's rating. And he was making a point about this idea that women are essentially waiting for men to decide who the winners are, and then they kind of hang out at the finish line, so to speak, right? And so that's one of those examples of trying to understand what might be the evolutionary source of something like that without shaming anybody, without like just try to understand it. So anyway, I'll admit that I'm at least intrigued by that idea, that like maybe we'd all be better off if we sort of understood our drives and our nature and why we respond the way we do. And sometimes, like we all know the example of like, I'm really attracted to that person, but I know they're not good for me, right? Like,
Yeah.
We've all wrestled with that, or, would you bring her home to mom? Or, that, right? Like, so these tensions are there and they're well known, but maybe in many cases they're mystifying to people. They like, why do I feel so torn? Like I'm having these feelings, these urges, but I know that would be a terrible idea, right? That kind of thing. So maybe understanding where those drives might come from might be helpful. That's my sort of position.
Oh.
But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, because it sounds like you're skeptical about that idea.
I find it very interesting as well. I see the value of evolutionary psychology being descriptive. It can describe why we might do the things that we do. It can put language and words, categories that help us understand ourselves and the opposite sex. Where I'm more skeptical is what we can take prescriptively from it. Because evolutionary psychology tends to, you're reducing relationships in people down into component parts. And then the question is, well, how do you put it all together? And what I think I often see coming from that is, well, how can I win? How can I dominate? And it's devoid of, I think, the overlay of meaning and telos of, okay, well, what is this all about? Sort of use some Pageauian language. It's earth without heaven. You have all the stuff down here without something higher and transcendent to aspire to. And I don't think that evolutionary psychology can map that, what we should aspire to. I don't think it'll give us telos beyond more reductive ways of looking at men and women, resources that men can provide, fecundity from women. And I think that's often where the story ends. Now, the descriptive piece, I do see a lot of value in that. But I see it if we're trying to build from there up to something transcendent, it feels like a Tower of Babel, I guess, in a way. I don't know that we'll get there. Or we'll be blind to other forces that are a part of us creating the story. I mean, one of the criticisms of evolutionary psychology is that you go, okay, well, we've observed these patterns, and you can't get away from story. You can't get away from narrative. So it's like, well, if I can tell a story that's plausible, that makes good accounting of the facts as we know them now, then my story wins. And it's like, well, what's behind that story? You're very clever. Maybe you're well-spoken, you're persuasive. What is your motivation for putting the facts together in that way? And that's what I get a little skeptical of, and where I feel, yeah, I guess a little bit nervous about where I can go if we don't speak about the transcendent at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like your concern is that it can be hacked, that it will make it easier to instrumentalize people. The very thing that we've alluded to a number of times that we're concerned about. A better understanding of female nature just leads to all sorts of gaming of the process. Yeah, that actually makes me think of something that I've been thinking is kind of related to marriage, but it's more related to just men and women.
Mm-hmm.
That the way sense making is done, it seems like, and now I'm tiptoeing because I'm wading out into
Come on, Rod, be
right?
bold.
It seems like consensus is a far more powerful driver of women's sense making than men. That kind of looking left and right and sort of taking your cues from your in-group. So that's partly why the sort of policing of in-group and out-group probably goes on. It's like, who's, one of us versus not one of us, right? And I'll admit over my lifetime, because, I think I alluded to this in our last conversation, I grew up sort of, this idea of sort of idealizing women and, if we just let women take over, they'll just make everything better because they're so much wiser than men and so much more virtuous, right? And all that. And, you say that and everybody's waiting for you to say something misogynistic, and I'll try to avoid that. But I've learned, that women are people, right? Mm-hmm. And with their strengths and weaknesses, and some you can sort of make some categorical statements about, but you're generalizing. But there does seem to be and I'm seeing this, like that was the whole COVID thing, right? Like all of a sudden, all the Instagram, with BLM, all of a sudden everybody had the black squares, right? There's certain things that it happens almost overnight. And it seems like there's some kind of a rush to get in on the consensus view before it leaves you behind or something like that. And so the idea of being iconoclastic, to sort of stand up against the tides of history, and you're the lone voice that said the thing that needs to be said, right? That seems like a very male thing, right? And what I'm not hearing a lot of conversation about is that now that we're in this world of hyperconnectivity and social media and all that, is that the consensus function of sense making makes it easily hacked. And again, I'm trying to speak carefully because I'm not trying to go all the way with the implications of that, like what that might say about the differences between men and women. But to your point, and maybe this is why probably women have a much more allergic reaction to a discussion about things like evolutionary psychology, for example, right? Because maybe they don't like the implications of it, or the conclusions you might draw, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that adds to the thought you're trying to elucidate here.
Oh, very much so. No, you summarized that much better than I said it. And I think that's what I hear, like with Chris Williamson's channel, is a lot of, this is how you hack it. It's okay, really focus on your career, and if you get your career, then you're going to, if you just work on your body and spend 10 hours a week in the gym, you'll be in that top 10%, and that's all you need to do, and you can beat up those guys. And there's nothing about like, well, what kind of man are you going to be?
And you still
how
need
do you
to
become
pick
a good
one.
husband? Or
right, you still have to pick one, right?
yeah. You still have to pick one, and once you've got it, okay, now what? How's it going to be durable? I haven't listened to a ton of them, but I've listened to them on and off over the last probably 2 or 3 years, and I haven't heard the discussion go in that direction. And I suspect that, I mean, some of it is that evolutionary psychology doesn't tend to move into the prescriptive that often. It does try to stay more descriptive. And I think it's interesting about psychology too. I think evolutionary psychology and a lot of clinical psych, I think it tries to stay descriptive. And social psychology, it does tend to be prescriptive, and it does tend to be more ideologically driven. And so you're dealing with these different elements of psychology in this as well. And I think that is the underlay, or in some cases the overlay in our society right now. I really think that my mentor nailed it when he said that, Islam is to the Middle East as psychology is to the West. It's like it just permeates everything. We're getting kind of hit at both levels. The prescriptive social psych and the attempts to describe from clinical and other elements of psychology. You're
thinking so many things. I don't know if I have time to say all the things I'm thinking. Well, I think on this topic, I think part of the reason, Rod, you said women don't tend to like the evolutionary psych path. I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't. And I don't because mostly the way I see it get used is it justifies men sleeping around and having mistresses on the side and whatever. And it's used to justify women being hypergamous and you making relationships with men utilitarian. And so I see evolutionary psych as just justifying the worst nature of both the sexes.
Can you say a little bit more about justifying, right? Because describing versus justifying.
Yeah, describing is saying, this is the way it is, but to justify it says, well, there's a reason for this, and we're valid to act in this way because this is our nature.
Yeah.
We were made this way. Evolution has produced us to interact and see the world this way. And so why wouldn't we act that way? If this is who we are, why would you not do that? And for a long time, various cultures and various religions have said, well, you don't do that because you're going to destroy everything, you knuckleheads. So how about you do it this other way? But our society has said, you know what? That sounds pretty good. And because we have psychology as the current overlay, we've said, you know what? The main goal is individuation, actualization, become your fullest, most beautiful self, and happiness is all that matters, which apparently you should be able to manifest. So just do what comes naturally. And if it comes naturally, that is the justification. So because you evolutionarily came to this way, you are fully legitimate to act in the most boorish, selfish way you can imagine, because it is your nature.
Well, and it's, I am, but you better not.
Genghis Khan is the top dude.
We tend to like it. We have as much freedom of movement as possible, but the other person stands still, right? Like you keep running the old code, I'll run the new code. Between you, you're almost convincing me. You're getting close. You're almost convincing me, but I'm going to push a little bit. Because I made that distinction between describing versus justifying, right?
Yeah.
I remember having an argument with a friend, old friend, and we were talking about the what's happening in the education space, public schools, private schools, hybrid models, homeschooling, and I was sort of I was describing how there's this, and this is actually pre-COVID. I was just saying that there's just an explosion of experiments going on in different models around what's the best way to educate children, and I'm talking about this because I'm interested in the subject, right? Like what will emerge from this, right? Well, she had two daughters in the school system, and she had they were at this point, I think, junior high and high school. And so she had to drive to different across town to drop one off here and one off there. She had gone through all kinds of machinations to sort of try to get them in the best available schools. And I remember she got we're old, we've known each other forever. She gets very upset with me. And I'm saying, look, I'm not even really taking a position here. I'm just sort of describing all the things that are happening that I'm curious about. I'm interested, right? And we just got stuck. She was just mad at me, right? I mean, we're fine. We got over it. But and later on, basically she kind of tacitly acknowledged that, maybe she just was taking the whole thing personally. But the point is that I was trying to make a similar point that I'm going to try to make now, right? Which is like, I'm interested in what is. I'm trying to have a healthy relationship with reality. Right? So I kind of want to know what's going on, and then I want to sort of relate to it in a way that's healthy, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm interested for that reason. That's why I'm interested, right? And easy for me to say, I don't have children in the schools, right? Like she's reacting to my sort of just standing back and, having my, commenting on something that I didn't have any skin in the game, where she did, right? But it makes me think of something, which is, evolution uses that word fitness, right? So there's truth, and then there's fitness, right? And truth, whatever that is, isn't necessarily the fit answer, right? In other words, you can come up with theories and abstractions, and this is, I think, kind of what you're getting at, right? But the truth still is important. So sometimes I think, like, remember the Jordan Peterson, Kathy Newman conversation? So what you're saying is, I remember Rebel Wisdom shortly after that had a therapist on, and she basically said, you just saw every man arguing with every woman, right? You just basically saw, like, and to some extent, anybody who's ever, been in a marriage and had an argument with the opposite sex kind of knows why it's funny, right? It's like, but that's not what I'm saying. Like, that's not my point. Like, right? And you're trying to make your point, and she's not interested in your point, right? She's having some other experience, right? Because she suspects you're up to something. She's not quite sure what it is yet, right? Right. So, maybe you could argue that women have an investment in the sort of evolutionary fit outcome, which is, right, we need to populate the earth, and we need men who stick around and provide and protect. And you can't have a man like just sitting over there in the corner just trying to figure the whole thing out, because he may never participate. Like, he may just opt out altogether, right? So if you're taking too rational approach to the conversation, that's not good. Like, that's probably going to be bad, right? So the reaction to a kind of philosophical or abstract approach to these very, very basic things, like how are we going to put food on the table? How are we going to, have a roof over our head? Like, very practical things that need to be addressed today, right? Not abstract theories, right? So I'm kind of meandering a bit, but hopefully you see what I'm trying to say about this idea of describing what is, and in a pursuit of trying to understand that as being potentially enlightening, versus describing, yeah, that's all fine, but reality is, I can't live in a world that you're describing.
The whole evolutionary psychology thing was a candidate for me making a video, basically similar to something that you sort of briefly touched on, Eamon, in that it does set up sort of a Garden of Eden narrative that, and the irony, of course, is that none of us would ever want to actually live the lives of this hallowed time when men were men and, women were dragged around by their hair, perhaps. What kind of hallowed time is this? Why, it sort of kneecaps anything like achievement. And, especially in sort of the setup to that particular idea. I mean, Genghis Khan is king, because Genghis Khan, in evolutionary psychology terms, has managed to spread his seed farther and further than any other historically identifiable man we could find. And he did so through ways that are historically describable. And then the funny thing is that this is sort of set up as the goal, and I remember having a conversation with a couple of good friends of mine, and I, who sort of practiced the Christian way and married to one woman, and no sexual history, and I mean all this stuff, and talking to my friends who were talking about because their children they hadn't had any children yet, and they were saying, yeah, I wouldn't want my children to, I would want my children to go out and have lots of sexual partners and lots of experimentation. And both of these two individuals had their share of their own. And so that I just asked them, I said, how has your previous sexual history played in your marriage? Silence. It's like, I guess I asked something there. And and so I think too, what that back to sort of Catherine's, a marriage is designed to build something, and it's not just the something between, but it's the marriage is designed to build something out of me. And Dale Cooper's parents' marriage managed to build Dale Cooper, who I don't know what kind of husband he was. He never divorced his wife or anything like that, but at least it gave him a vision of he saw his father. Obviously, I think his father would have loved to have had a wife that he could sleep with, would have loved to have had a wife who could travel with him and, do all sorts of things. Would certainly not have desired for his wife to live in an iron lung, but yet there was a vision that his father was a hero because of that marriage. And that's not something I can imagine evolutionary psychology bestowing upon us.
I think I'm outvoted here.
Well, we are 2 hours into this thing. I don't know if this is a good thing to land a plane, or if anybody wants some closing comments.
I have a couple comments.
Yes.
Rod, you made a comment earlier and we kind of scooted past it, but I thought it was really good. You said, after I kind of gave my spiel about marriage, you said, I'm inspired by that, but we need a secular language for that, because just trying to import Christian language, it's not helpful. It's not functionally useful for a lot of people. And I think that I'm very much on board with that vision. We need a way to be able to talk about things in words that track the people. It's hard to get people to love a vision for something where they can't even understand what you're saying. So I think that is really key. And then the other thing, Paul, you had said, I kind of complained about, femininity not being embraced by the culture. And you said, yeah, you talked to somebody else. And I think Eamon said, what's the spirit behind that? So I was thinking about that a little bit. And I was thinking that when I see that in individual people, usually it's women who have either been assaulted sexually or kids who've seen their mom beat up or assaulted. So it seems like a reaction against the damage caused by what's perceived as the weakness of a woman and the vulnerability and how that allows for harm. And so I'm not exactly sure if there's a connection there, how that connects, but that was just something that was kind of spinning in the back of my mind. If that's part of, we don't use this language as much, and maybe I'm not using it as appropriately, but maybe there's some cultural trauma there that needs to be worked through as a society.
Well, when people are using each other at scale, there's going to be a whole lot of wreckage, emotional wreckage.
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that it does seem that it has spread beyond the at least direct victims of, trauma of one kind. It seems like there's a full-on cultural assault on marriage as an oppressive institution that I think extends beyond, the personal experience of trauma. So there are an awful lot of people who are coming out of our institutions of higher learning with ideas about the patriarchy and why marriage is essentially just an extension of this oppressive regime of men over women. So, but I agree with your basic point. I think the problem is culture wide.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking of it sort of like this is how it's I see it express itself in individuals, and I think on a cultural level, it's a cultural level reaction to that as well, which isn't saying either that that's necessarily the case, because it might just be a similar phenomena but a different cause. But it also doesn't say the cause of the harm done to the feminine, and it might even be the feminine, not women, right? Like, I'm not exactly sure on what level that lands, but that's where I see it on the micro level. So.
Maybe something to talk about the next time we talk, actually, because we haven't really done much discussion about, well, first of all, it's implied, but we haven't tackled directly that we don't think marriage is an oppressive institution. And maybe we should be more overt about why we don't see that as being true. But this point you're making, exploring ideas like masculinity and femininity, I guess Jung probably, the origins are in Jung, but there's been all kinds of other thinkers and writers that have come since. I know I've been very interested in that subject now for 20 years and read a lot about it. Robert Johnson's books, the book He, the book She, and the book We, beautiful little books about sort of using Greek mythology to explore the notions of masculinity and femininity. What is it? She Who Runs with the Wolves. That was kind of one of the Bibles of sort of feminine mythology. And you guys would have the expertise, I think, to talk about this in a way that maybe Paul or I would be not quite as fluent. But I do think that is a fruitful area of discussion if we feel like we can handle it, in a useful way.
Yeah, agreed. It's a quick story here. I think sums up where a lot of people are at. I was doing this is about 3 or 4 years ago, training for like a tool for assessing autism, and it was me and a room full of women. And for the tool, one of the things that you're asking people on the autism spectrum about or suspected of it are all these questions about relationships. And one of them is about whether or not you would want to be married or in a long-term relationship with somebody. What would be good about it? What would be difficult about it? And one of the, I think it was a occupational therapist, was like, oh yeah, well, I was doing this the other day, and the client responded, oh well, marriage is an oppressive system, and all the women just they laughed and were like, oh yeah, ha ha ha. And then the next day, the guy who was doing the training, he was like, okay, you really need to be aware of what kids are into, and you're going to be asking about long-term plans. So you should know things like what's big in video games and Twitch streamers. So he showed this clip because you hear a lot of kids say they want to be a Twitch streamer or something like that for like a career. And his point in showing this person was like, look at how many things they have to do. They have to get people's attention. They have to be funny. They have to be good at the game. Like, this is not going to be realistic for very many people on the spectrum, given how it presents itself. And he just threw this one comment out. He said, well, like this streamer, he makes about, $20 million a year. The same girl who made the comment about marriage being an oppressive institution, she goes, oh, is he single? And the girls, they're like, oh wow, oh, and they're like, Well, here we go. This is the contradiction right here in front of me. On the one hand, it's like you don't want anything to do with that, and the other, if he's a geek who is making $15 million playing video games, then here we go. And what my point is, I think it's like
oppress me, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can be in your room playing video games and streaming, and
I'll spend your money.
Yeah. So my point in sharing the story is I think a lot of people are confused. And this is why I think there is an interest in evolutionary psychology, is it's like, hey, you only need a little bit of self-awareness to be like, okay, what I'm saying and what I'm doing, what I'm attracted to, these desires, they don't match up, they're not compatible. And I'm a mess because these desires are in conflict with one another. And here you move to evolutionary psychology and go, here's an explanation. I think people want some sort of way of making sense of why do I do what I do. And I think my interest in it, and where I think where there's utility, is you end up viewing it through a moral frame one way or another. Is these are the things that are working within me that I need to be aware of, because if I don't get a handle on them, they have a life of their own, and I'm not going to take my desires as just a given good. But what do I do with them? How do I master them so they don't master me? And why would I do that, and to what end? Those are the conversations that I think are a level up from what evolutionary psychology has to offer. And I think that we need to be able to engage with and present to people in a winsome way if there's going to be interest in marriage. So
it's the is-ought distinction again, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
With some insight into what is going on with me and who am I, and what are the long-term implications for the decisions that I make. Yeah.
There's also just a slew of just statistical data out there about poverty rates and marriage. I mean, if two people can pool resources and work together, generally speaking, and again, there are people out there who are going to make a lot of money, and they're going to make a lot of money. And I've seen guys, I mean, some of the guys that I know they're very smart, they've got good jobs in tech. I mean, they've got more money than they know what to do with. And, you can only buy so many toys, yada, 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 et cetera. But, I met Louise Perry when I was in the UK, and we could, I said, I got a YouTube channel, I could have you on. And she said, I don't really like doing book interviews that much. I said, well, trust me, if you're on my channel, it won't be like your traditional book interview. But we could perhaps bring her into this conversation.
She could be
an interesting partner in this.
Particularly coming from the perspective she's coming from, right?
Yeah.
She has a kind of credibility as a feminist and more left-leaning. And the fact that I've been waiting for women to finally just say, like, this isn't such a great deal, and so she's doing it so well that she'd be great.
So one of the things on Netflix that I can recommend is Borgen. It comes out of Denmark. I don't know if any of you've seen it. It's on Netflix, Borgen. There are 4 seasons on Netflix, and it's some of the best TV I've ever seen. You got to be willing to read subtitles, and along the way you realize how much English has sort of seeped into Danish culture. But it's about a woman who becomes the prime minister of Denmark, and it really tracks many of these issues that we're talking about, because for me a big question is, when I had my conversation with Vaush, or people say Vaush isn't the way he pronounces it, I don't know, but okay, if not marriage, then what? That's sort of my question with all of this. Mm-hmm. Because it's so funny, because I often, like, I've had, I've been married to one woman for almost 35 years now. I've only had sex with one woman my entire lifetime. To me, evolutionary psychology would say Vanderklay's a loser. I mean, well, maybe I've had 5 children, so I've done a little seed spreading, but But I regularly meet guys who have had sex that evolutionary psychology would say, oh, he's a top dude. He's had, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 plus sexual partners their life. And, they'll at some point, if we develop enough of a relationship, they'll look at me and say, I wish I had what you have. And they're not speaking Christian terms. They're just, my marriage isn't perfect and everything isn't always to my liking, et cetera, et cetera. But they look from the outside and say, you know what, on Thanksgiving, you were surrounded by people who loved you and you loved them. And there's a sense in that little group that, we might have our little spats, but when the chips are down, we've all got each other's back and we're here for each other and we love each other. And, no matter what happens, even divorce or whatever, there'll be a foundation of love here that probably nothing will sever in your lifetime. You've built that. And in a lot of ways, I would have to say, when I was in my 20s, I was too dumb to think of anything like this. But, the mark of a healthy culture is it affords wisdom to people who haven't had enough time in their life to generate it themselves. And, I got to be really careful with that because, Rod, your story, you did the right thing. You got married young and, and I'm not going to point fingers because I don't know the details and I don't even want to know. But
well, I wanted to speak up here because I would be one of those people who admire you, Paul. And it's unknown whether I will be able to have children. We're hopeful. Sometimes you have to at least consider the possibility that the main contribution that you can make is a cautionary tale. And part of my interest in this topic and in this conversation is that I want to show up as someone who can speak to that. I may not be able to have my own children. And, as I said, we're hopeful. I would even accept your prayers. But you're alluding to this. I'll make it easy for you, Paul, because I made the choices that were available to me. You might say I optimized, and I say that sarcastically. So I completely understand why someone would envy you that, because I would be one of those people. I'm not saying I envy what it took to get that.
Yeah.
But I envy the outcome.
Yeah, like Dale Cooper's father. I don't envy anything that happened to him, but I envy the kind of I can envy the kind of man he became by the difficult circumstances that were pressed upon him and the way that he engaged them. Because and this is, a lot of people are quick to dismiss the hero's journey, and it certainly has its limitations and shortcomings, but there is really something deep to it. It's just that there are many different kinds of heroes, and a lot depends on what graph you're charting heroism. So, well, is this a good place to land the plane?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, I'll end the recording and I'm going to post this tomorrow. So